I can't tell you the number of times that I have worn socks with sandals. My wife and my children have made it very clear to me I am not to wear socks with sandals. But there are times when I believe shoes would be too warm, but sandals without socks would be too cold. So it seems natural to put socks on sandals. Total dork, totally not cool. Also, I'm a deviant. Welcome to Chapter 7, The Social Psychology of Deviance. This topic often conjures images of crime, and we will be talking about crime. But deviance can include any way that we break a norm in society, whether it be a formal rule with consequences for breaking those rules, or very informal ones like wearing socks with sandals. Have you ever heard the expression, "It's all relative"? I'm going to try to convince you in this short lecture that, well, some things are relative, but not everything is relative. And even those things we might consider relative sometimes are not as relative as you'd think. We start with symbolic interaction, which kind of is like everything's relative. But it's also about the social construction of reality. It's not the social construction of relative. Because once a people make something real, it's real in its consequences. And it may not be real in a year or 2 years or 20 years, but when it happens, when it's important to somebody, it becomes real. And hence, while deviance may be relative in one sense, in another sense, it's very real to other people and even to yourself. I'm going to try to convince you of that. Ethnomethodology is a form of symbolic interaction that tries to discover all of the norms that exist in society. Some norms are easy to find. They're written in laws. That's coded. It's right there in front of us. There are a lot of things in life, though, that are not coded in law. And as a result, we need to find ways to discover them. How do you prove, for instance, what direction people face in an elevator, or greetings that people make on a day-to-day basis? It's not written down. So one way to do this is to assess it using your own common sense, and then go and break those common sense rules and see people's reactions. Two things you can do with that. First is you can note how many times people react to you breaking those rules. Is it 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10, 6 times out of 10? The other thing is that people respond more strongly to those things that are important to them. So this is associated with a theorist named Garfinkel, and he sent students out to break a bunch of social rules, and they would collect data like that. And of course, things that were more important to people were dealt with more harshly than those things that were less important, and they were corrected more often than not on things that are more important to people than less. But that's the only way we get at these rules that are written in our hearts, but not in our law books. Now, I said we're not going to spend all of our time talking about criminal deviance, but I'm going to start a litany of theories that do focus on criminal deviance, but I think they can be applied to other elements of our life as well. Think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever been called a nerd, a rebel, a teacher's pet? Those labels, good or bad, can stick. Sociologists know a lot about how negative ones can define who you are. Labeling theory extends the idea of negotiated meaning. Deviance is a consequence of a social process in which a negative characteristic becomes part of an individual's identity. But I want to stress the labels can be positive, but we don't put people in jail because of positive labels, and that's why we tend to focus on those negative labels. We're going to start with the famous theorist with the name of Lemmert. Lemmert argued that not every act of deviance leads to the label of deviant. There's usually a primary act of deviance, an initial act that causes others to label you as a deviant, such as shoplifting a candy bar. But secondary deviance occurs after the individual accepts the deviant label and continues to commit those acts to reinforce that initial label. It takes many acts of deviance to get to that secondary level of deviance, and most people never get to that point. An important element of this theory is the idea of agents of social control. These are people in society who are formally designated to label people in the first place. Obviously, anyone in the court system would fit into that category. To some degree, you could argue there are people in schools that do the same thing for children who that's the place where a lot of deviance occurs in the first place. And they all are involved in the deviance process. I would argue to some degree we're all agents of social control. We pick those things that we consider normal or not. And when someone doesn't act within the realm of what we consider normal, we label people as deviant as well. It's just that we're not officially given that ability or capacity to do so. Outsiders are people who are labeled deviant and have come to accept that deviant label. So Becker argued there's 3 stages of becoming an outsider. 1, committing deviant acts, that's the primary deviance, accepting that status, the secondary deviance. But here's the key, joining a deviant subculture. Deviant subcultures are important because they not only confirm and make us feel good about our identity, in this case a deviant identity, but they also teach us how to be a good deviant, which helps to further us want to be a deviant in the first place. Remember, I told you to get to know the name Erving Goffman. He was going to come up again, and here he is once more in this chapter. Here, he's looking at deviance in the form of stigma, any attribute that's deeply discrediting. But he's different than Becker and other people in that he's not just looking at criminal deviance. He's looking at physical deformities. He's looking at being a part of an undesirable social group, and it could be a criminal, but it also could be any kind of group in society that people generally don't accept. It also could be a character flaw, such as a drug addiction or something like this. In many cases, people do what's called a retrospective reinterpretation or interpretation of their past in order to see their deviance as part of that. In other words, people try to create a story to explain how they became the person they are. In movies, you'll hear quite often criminals will talk about how they started a life of deviance or crime at a very early age. Or agents of social control will do that on somebody. That is to say, they'll label somebody deviant and say, oh, well, they've always been like that. The key is we don't know for sure if they've always been like that, but people seem to be driven to create this narrative that ties in earlier acts to recent and also create maybe even a future of where that identity is likely to go. Becker and Goffman show us something that's very important, that being labeled deviant isn't just an external process. It often leads to profound internal shifts, influencing how individuals see themselves and their paths. And deviant subcultures then provide a context or a survival mechanism for them to live out those identities in their lives today. I want to touch briefly on the concept of delabeling, because according to symbolic interaction, if we socially construct deviance, we should be able to deconstruct it. Yet we know people hold on to those deviant labels. One reason we believe that might be the case is, remember, we've constructed this whole world around being deviant. There's at least 3 sets of things, though, that keep us from changing a deviant label. One is internal conflicts, battling with our own past and self-perception. Also, there are situational constraints, the lack of opportunities, negative social networks, and structural barriers. So once we have that internal change, it's hard to change ourselves, however we got to that point. There's also situational things. We're putting ourselves in an environment which makes it difficult to step out of that deviant label. There's also structural forces that impact us and our ability to leave a deviant label, systematic issues that make it hard to reintegrate into society, such as having a criminal record that would make it difficult to get employment afterwards. The social structure and personality perspective approaches deviance a little bit differently than symbolic interactionists. They may agree there's some social construction processes going on, but they also believe there are larger cultural and social structural things that are impacting people's choices in the area of deviance. Specifically, Merton's social strain theory argues that deviance is a natural outcome when people can't achieve socially accepted goals through legitimate means. It's like wanting to win the race, but someone took away your running shoes. Your text provides a full array of ways that people can react to life events, can react to societal structural issues. We're going to focus on the what he calls the innovator, or what you and I might call the deviant or criminal. So picture a scenario where you want a nice house and you want a nice car. You want to have children and you want them to have piano lessons and all the other things that middle-class families want. But what if you're growing up in an environment where it's very difficult to finish school, let alone go to college, and you can't make the kind of money in your job to afford all of those things? So you have a couple of options in front of you. One is you keep trying and hope for the best, but maybe you live with the consequences of the fact that you don't achieve those things and you don't get those things. That is one way to do it, and it is inside the model. But another way to do it is to say, well, maybe if I sell drugs or do something else that makes money illegally, I can at least obtain those things. And maybe later I'll become legitimate. But let me at least get through this door to my goal, just like everybody else. It's one of many ways that people can respond to making these worlds come together. Lastly, I want to talk about this concept of anomie. Anomie is often defined as normlessness, but I want to stress what that really means. At least in terms of deviance, what we mean by that is that stress that comes from wanting things in life, that things that society says we should have, and being frustrated from getting those things, stops from getting those things that we want. That's true anomie. And so whether you're a rich person who wants more wealth or a poor person who just wants the middle class wealth, you're wanting those things that society says they should get, and you're stifled in some way. That is true anomie. What makes this theory so eloquent is it applies to rich people as well as poor. Picture the people who've done insider trading or have stolen from companies. They're already making hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars a year, but they still want to steal more. But that's because their goals might be higher than ours. They want not just a nice house and a nice car, but they want multiple houses, and they want to go on cruises, and they want to do those things. They too have these goals, and they're not able to get it even with their wealthy positions. So what do? They do white-collar crime in order to achieve those goals. Same principle, different group of people. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever committed a crime? Statistically speaking, you probably have not. That's the real question for social control theory. Why don't people commit crime in the first place? Once again, we see the role of society, and that is when people take ownership of their role in society, they are less likely to commit a crime against it. It's kind of like self-harm. Why would you harm something that is part of who you are? So in that sense, how does society become part of you? According to Hershey, there are 4 elements to this. One is attachment, emotional bonds with other people. Other people, again, meso-level society, are how we feel society, the people around us. The second part of this is commitment, the rational decision to follow rules in the first place. Most of you probably believe it's important not to lie, cheat, or steal. There might be conditions we do it, but we generally try to avoid those things. Third is involvement. People participate in acceptable activities such as clubs and sports and church, and we know that people who participate in more of those things do less crime. And finally, belief, the respect for law and order. Together, these things help us to understand how the average person avoids getting involved in the criminal justice system in the first place. You might be an innovator. You want the things that everybody else does, but you choose not to commit crimes in order to obtain those things. And it's not just about getting caught and going to jail. It's also about what would your friends think if they found out you did it. How could you interact with people in the future if they knew that you were a criminal and you couldn't hide that stigma in some way? So this theory is important to understand another side or another dimension to how society impacts our decisions to commit crime, or in this case, to not commit crime. I only want to mention social disorganization theory here because I think it's a reflection of what we just reviewed. The basic idea of the theory is that people are more likely to commit deviant behavior when they live in poor economic conditions. Those economic conditions are both physical, hence the broken window theory. The more physically deteriorated the environment, the more likely people are to commit crime. But there's also low economic status, family disruption, and general lack of social cohesion. And I think this is kind of connected to the original idea that people are less likely to commit crime when they feel connected to. They don't feel themselves separate from society. In this case, their neighborhood represents their physical society around them. Together, these theories provide a powerful sociological lens for understanding why crime and deviance might be more prevalent in certain areas, underscoring the crucial role community structure and social ties play in maintaining social order. We put differential association theory under the group processes heading because the argument of this theory, which is super famous as well, from Edwin Sutherland, is that we learn deviance like we learn anything else, through interactions with other people. Sounds kind of like symbolic interaction, to be quite honest with you. But here we're focusing on the importance of the group in deciding whether to commit criminal acts. Differential association theory is a powerful counterpoint to the theories that focus primarily on individual pathology and structural strain. It highlights the deeply social nature of learning, even when it comes to deviant behaviors. This theory is particularly illuminating when applied to white-collar crime, demonstrating criminality isn't just about traditional street crime, but can be learned behavior within seemingly legitimate professional environments. It challenges us to look at the social dynamics that normalize and rationalize behaviors that would otherwise be considered deviant or illegal. I think it's super important to make sure you know that differential association theory is really it really focuses on traditional street crimes and things like that. But we're kind of applying it to every kind of deviance and crime, including a white-collar crime. Picture a scenario where an employer hires two people. They have one younger employee, one senior. And in this corporate setting, the younger one can learn how to embezzle funds by observing maybe an older colleague who's been doing it for many years. But the other thing that person may be learning is how to rationalize why it's not really stealing or everyone does it. So differential association helps explain why people do crimes. They learn that it's an okay thing to do. They learn that how to do it and how to do it well, but they also learn how to rationalize it. And I want you to think back about times, statistically speaking, most of you have done some kind of deviant act, even if it's not criminal, and think what role other people played in that process. And I suspect if you really think about it, some of you would try to rationalize why you did it. Well, what helped you rationalize it? Was it just an internal thing? Was it a dialogue with you and the people that you did the deviant act with? I suspect there's some social element to that in some way, and that's what differential association theory is all about. We only covered probably some of the bigger theories in sociology about deviance, and unfortunately focused mostly on criminal deviance. I encourage you to go back into the book and review some of those other ones and look more intently into the ones we did cover if you really want to answer the question why people commit deviance or criminality more specifically. Also, there are other fields that study this topic, and they take other theoretical perspectives. There's studies in biology and psychology that I think would inform you as well. But I can look at it as a bunch of puzzle pieces, and I gave you one puzzle piece to work with, and those other fields can give you other puzzle pieces. There's no simple answer, but there are answers to questions about these things, and this is just the beginning of a larger journey.